Guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, "Neighbor Camps on My Property and Uses My Land as Private Campsite." Big mistake. I have a neighbor that I always saw as a little bit odd. We live in the kind of area that we end up with pretty big areas of land, and while the space makes it possible to not know your neighbors, we all do anyway. She is always just making weird decisions that don't seem to make any sense, like I noticed she once ordered and stored a ton of hay on her property. The thing is that she has no livestock, so the hay just sat there for over a year before it finally ended up getting dumped. The point I want to make is that this woman makes decisions that don't have any logic behind them, and I gave up a long time ago trying to find any in her actions. She had bought a camper RV and I actually thought it meant she was going to go on vacations and maybe give me a break from her. Instead, it just seemed to sit there for a while until she packed a bag, got into the camper, and drove for about 2 minutes right onto my property. I understand wanting to camp somewhere close to home, but that was ridiculous. I had told her to get off of my property, but she just kept saying that it was her campsite and that I should deal with it. I want to just note that while it sounds like she wasn't all there upstairs, she had total understanding of what she was doing. This was not the first time she had tried to do stuff on my property either. I got the same talk from her that I always did how I should be a good neighbor and let her do things on my land because it was bigger than hers and I had space she didn't. If my land was bigger, it really wasn't by much, and I didn't want her hanging around on my property. I had called the police on her before, but since she is my neighbor and so close to the property line, they mainly just warn her and just leave. This just fuels her entitled behavior, and she seems to at least once a week move her camper onto my property and use it as her personal little campsite. Honestly, I know that her real reasoning is so she can make a mess and not have to clean it up. Also, she doesn't want to pay to stay at an actual spot for campers, so she just tries, and succeeds, in using my property for that. I didn't know what to do and I was playing around with the option of just privately suing her. I had the police reports and even video evidence that she had been on my property. That might only get me a small amount of money, and she would still end up saving by doing this on my property instead of somewhere she is meant to be. One day was different though, and after I went to bed, I noticed that it was pretty loud near the edge of my property. This was where she usually set up camp, but this time was not only very different but finally over the line. She was having some kind of party where people were dancing to music and getting drunk. I also saw smoke because they had started a bonfire and were cooking over it. I was beyond mad because I knew that whatever part of the ground they had started the fire on was now destroyed and going to be my problem. I wanted to call the cops about the illegal party, and I was going to be more aggressive and demand they do something about neighbor using my land as her own personal camping grounds. Before I could get to the phone though, I noticed that the smoke was getting bigger. The music had stopped, and I heard people making different kinds of noise. I couldn't see it clearly from where I was, so I went outside and got a little bit closer. It turns out that the smoke was not only coming from the bonfire, but from my actual property. They did a bad job securing where they set the fire, and now it was spreading around my property. People were trying to put out what they could, while I heard another say that they called the fire department to help put it out. Just a side note that where I live gets very dry, so a fire like this needs to be put out right away or it would spread. That also means that starting a bonfire in a yard like this is actually a really stupid idea, and while it isn't illegal, it will get you a stern talking to. At first the fire marshal was giving me the lecture before I explained that it was my neighbor who was illegally on my property that started the fire. The police always come here when the fire department is called, so they were also hearing what I was saying. One officer, I guess, had enough of coming out here to listen to how my neighbor kept going onto my property without permission. The fire could have been way worse and burned down my entire house if it wasn't caught early enough. Or it could have spread the other way towards the trees and really gotten out of control. Neighbor was finally getting what I wanted to happen from day one. She was getting arrested, only now it wasn't for trespassing alone, it was also for arson. She got taken away saying that she had the right to camp and that it wasn't arson because if it was she would have burned my whole house down. That obviously didn't help her case. The next day I noticed that her camper was still there on my property, and she wasn't home, so I could do one thing that I thought would be great revenge. I called a tow company and told them that there was a camper parked on my property that didn't belong to me. They had to come with a special kind of truck that was made for big things like RVs and campers. It was going to be towed away at the expense of neighbor, and since she was dealing with the police at the station, she couldn't do anything about it. It turns out the local place where cars get towed isn't actually able to handle something like a camper, so it had to be taken 30 miles away. Much more expensive, but all of this going to the expense of the owner. I finally saw her again later that day after she ended up working things out and getting a ton of fines regarding fire safety. She had to pay thousands of dollars for the fines, pay me for the property damage, and take a fire safety class that I just have a feeling would be long and boring. When she noticed the camper was gone, she started yelling at me and telling me that I stole it, and she was going to sue me for this. I just calmly handed her the info for the towing company and said that it was illegally on my land, so I made sure that it got moved. I have no idea how much a towing cost is for a camper that had to be driven to a special lot 30 miles away. What I can say is that it must have not been worth it, because I never did see that camper again. In fact, she stopped coming onto my property in general after that, and I have a feeling they told her to stop trespassing, or she was going to get arrested again. The next story is titled, Beelzebastard Trashed My Room. Hey, Reddit family. I'm back again with another story from my crazy life. I've been feeling pretty sick the last few days, but never gave it much thought until yesterday. Went and got tested and I have COVID. My kids are staying with a friend for a few days while I recuperate and take some time off work. It's hitting me pretty hard, so I'm staying in bed for the most part, but I hate sitting around and doing nothing, so I hopped on my computer and decided to share another story with you guys. This is a story about my brother, Beelzebastard. He was a selfish, abusive, piece of shit drug addict that hated the idea of working to make money for himself. He preferred to mooch off other people and stole from me and Beelzebitch many times. He always got drug dealers and his friends to give him drugs on the promise of paying them back. Spoiler alert. He never did, and he got his ass kicked by drug dealers more than once. His last girlfriend, Hatchetface, was just as toxic and insane as he was, and she treated him like shit, but she is the reason why he became addicted to drugs and drinking heavily. During their whole relationship, his relationship with Beelzebitch was extremely strained. He would steal money or demand it to give to Hatchetface for drugs. He took whatever money he could get and spend it on booze and load himself up until he was falling down drunk, and even hurt himself a few times from how intoxicated he was. The two of them were like two rabid wolverines going at each other every day. Their fights were violent. So violent that they were arrested several times for abusing each other. Hatchetface used Beelzebitch for a place to crash whenever she felt like it. Despite Beelzebitch being a complete just no alcoholic with a gambling addiction, she hated Hatchetface with a burning, radioactive passion because she turned her flying monkey into a drug-addicted slug. When it came out that Hatchetface had been cheating on him with several different men, Beelzebastard flew into a rage and beat her so badly, she was hospitalized. He spent 6 months in jail, and when he got out, he went back to being Beelzebitch's flying monkey again, but he took on the attitude that all women were nothing but manipulative, lying, cheating a-holes. Hatchetface tried to get back with him, but Beelzebitch chased her off somehow. Sorry for the long background, but I like to give context, as you all know. Another thing about my brother is that he would get insanely jealous whenever me or my sister, Beelzebrat, had money to blow on things we wanted. All of my childhood, I didn't have much. I had used bed from my cousin and I had to share closet space with my sister. When we moved into a bigger house, we all got our own rooms. I was given some old bedroom furniture from a friend, and I had that to tie me over while I was slowly putting a new bedroom together for myself. I had dropped out of high school and got my GED when I was struggling to maintain my grades and hold down a job. I was working full-time at a fast food place until I got fired because I was late one too many times due to not having a ride to work. I turned 18, then started working at the local bar as a waitress while I was working to get my liquor license. I was able to get a cheap car, and over the course of an entire year, I built myself a nice bedroom. A new bed, frame and headboard, a dresser, nightstands, lamps, decorations. I had spent thousands putting this room together. I was so proud of it. It came out exactly as I had envisioned it, and when my brother saw it, he threw a fit. He said it wasn't fair that I got to have a nice room while he had nothing but a shitty room. I told him if he got a job and paid for his own things then he would have a nice room like mine. He scoffed at me and said working was for idiots and he was too intelligent to work. I rolled my eyes and closed my door. Beelzebub came into my room and demanded to know how I was able to afford such a nice room while her precious boy didn't have anything nice. I told her I paid for everything from working, like a normal person does. She called me a smart ass and told me to give my brother money to buy some nice things for himself. I said no because he wouldn't spend it on a bed or anything for his room. He'd spend it on drugs or alcohol. She tried to argue, and I said if she wanted him to have nice things then she should buy them. She said it wasn't fair that she had to and I asked her how was it fair that I did. She said as his sister, it's my duty to take care of him. I reminded her that he was the older sibling and at nearly 21 years old, he should be working and paying rent like I had to. She tried to argue more and I slammed the door in her face. I went to work that night and tried to have a good shift. By the time I got off work, I was mentally and physically exhausted. Too many shitty people came into the bar and dealing with their crap would leave me crying most days whenever I got home. I pulled up to the house in my car and noticed a fire in my front yard. I got out and walked over to it and immediately noticed it was two of my dresser drawers, smashed to pieces and set on fire. I could hear screaming coming from inside and I walked in and overheard Beelzebub screaming at Beelzebastard about the fire. I walked to my room and I was horrified by what I saw. My room was destroyed. Everything in it was trashed. My bed, my dresser, my decorations, all of it was ruined. There was broken glass on the floor, my sheets were torn apart, even my brand new computer was damaged. My heart was broken. I couldn't do anything but cry. Beelzebub started screaming at me about how if I had just given my brother money, this wouldn't have happened. I became angry and started screaming at her that if she had been a parent instead of an alcoholic piece of shit, my brother wouldn't be the entitled a-hole he is. She tried to hit me but I pushed her away and slammed the door in her face. I opened my closet and was surprised to see my clothes were unscathed. I packed up everything in the closet and walked out of the house and into my car. I locked the doors and called the police and reported what my brother had done. When the cops got there, I was so angry and upset, I could barely speak. Beelzebub came outside and tried to stop the cops from getting to my brother. They threatened to arrest her, and she backed off. My brother was arrested and thrown into the back of a police cruiser. Beelzebub began screaming at me again saying all of this was my fault and I just let her rant. She then tried to make me stay to clean up the mess. I just drove away, leaving her there screaming at me in the driveway. I went to stay at a friend's place for a few days. I ended up going back home and cleaning up the mess anyway because she refused to clean it. Beelzebastard never apologized or expressed any remorse years after it happened. He spent 90 days in jail for destroying my property. That's all he got considering how long I had taken to make that room look as good as it did. I bought a new bedroom set eventually after sleeping on the floor, while saving enough money to do so. I never had the bedroom of my dreams again until after I moved out permanently. Beelzebastard never bothered me when I was dating my eldest son's birth father. Too much a coward to pick on someone his own size. When I had my son, his behavior cooled but only a little bit. The last story is titled, "You want me to clean your side path? No problem." So, a few years ago I was helping to lay a new concrete driveway at my mother's house. Some of the runoff water ran into the neighbor's side pathway leaving a slight discoloration. A simple wash would have removed this, but the neighbor complained and told us we had to clean it up. Now this is fair enough, but they weren't very polite in asking us about it, especially when we had no idea it had happened. Anyway, I agreed to clean the path for them. So, I got out the power washer and started at the front of the house. This path has not been cleaned in a long time, so the power washer was making a noticeable difference. Up the path I went, doing a very thorough job of getting all the years of grime off, including the slight concrete slurry from our work. I continued up to the point where the runoff started, and then I stopped. I left a perfectly etched line that really made it obvious just how filthy the path was before I washed it. Up it went, all the way up the side of the house, plain to see. I'd cleaned up every last bit of concrete runoff and made that pathway shine, until it didn't. They couldn't really complain as it wasn't my job to clean the entire path and I had cleaned up all the concrete runoff as agreed. My mother doesn't get along with them at all, so she was happy with the result even though she didn't originally want me to clean it for them. Edit. Okay, just to clear up a few points. The runoff was just the water we used to wash the top of the concrete, so it wasn't thick and lumpy. There was no way to see that it had happened from our house. It ran across a garden bed and under the fence at just one spot and trickled down their path. Once I was shown what had happened, I would have been more than happy to clean it up. I only got malicious because they came in hot. Thank you for listening.